Okay, so moving on now to the second part of the lecture, which is going to be about yoga decolonized. Kind of like what I did the last time I had a lecture section where we talked about the Indian context and understood how that has affected the way that the West perceives yoga, but also trying to place yoga in its context that it comes from, especially its modern context, right? So to start with, I'm just going to show you a couple of stills from these reels that I saw on Instagram. I'm not going to play them because there's nothing said in it that's actually useful other than the text that we can see. So this is a yoga instructor who is talking about reclaiming yoga from its capitalist Western forms and making it accessible to marginalized communities, right? So you can see that she says the things that don't sit right with her are the reduction of yoga as a modern day postural practice. So we just talked about how that is not necessarily authentic, but we'll talk about that authenticity even further now. The lack of accessibility for or representation of BIPOC yoga practitioners, so it being primarily a white practice, the hypersexualization of it, the commodification, the cultural appropriation. So there's a large conversation here around what are the issues with yoga in the West and how those need to be changed. Fair enough, that is definitely an important conversation to have. This is another one that she uploaded where she talks about the language used in yoga. So the English words that are often used for the postures, which I'm sure a lot of you might be familiar with, so downward dog, lotus, tree, pigeon, all of these coming from Sanskrit. And her kind of argument here is we should bring Sanskrit back into the yoga classroom because that is in some way original, authentic, and that yoga is being oversimplified by using these English terms, and we're erasing its heritage, its practitioners, and so she wants to embrace Sanskrit, which, again, okay, fine, fair enough. That's one claim to authenticity and decolonizing the practice of yoga, right? But what we maybe want to consider further than just saying, right, go back to the way things were, is interrogating what yoga looks like in India and what power dynamics it promotes in its country of origin, right? And a good place to start is looking at how the UN in 2015 created an International Day of Yoga in June, that was. And that was after a speech given by the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. And one of the readings for this week by Jyoti Puri talks about this speech by Modi and puts it in the context, this speech in the context of his larger policies and his political ideology. So what Puri says that in India, yoga is increasingly being used to advance questionable forms of nationalism, right? And we can see from this quote here that she's talking about the reason, of course there is a reason for us to recognize that yoga as an industrial complex is dominated by white women and men, but going back and reproducing Hindu nationalist renditions of yoga is not the solution either. And that is what Modi is doing here, right? So in his speech, which Puri studies in detail, what Modi does is he weaponizes that Orientalist association of yoga with calm and peace and this mysterious ancient origin to present modern India as being spiritual and peaceful as well. Why is this a problem? Because in the same month that Modi is in the UN presenting India in this way, a Muslim man is lynched by Hindu villagers in the first case of cow vigilantism in India. So he was falsely suspected of slaughtering a cow and was violently attacked by Hindu men, right? And the issues with cow vigilantism and associated kind of lynchings of marginalized communities in India is a big enough problem that the Human Rights Watch has a report on it. And it's kind of linked here, so you can read it if you were interested in knowing more about it. But as you can see from the section of the report I have here, the groups who are conducting these kind of violent attacks on marginalized communities, especially Muslims, are connected to Modi's BJP party, right? So once they came to power, that rhetoric increased, and that is kind of an impetus for why these attacks have increased as well. So we have Modi and his discourse around yoga and the institution of International Yoga Day and presenting India as this peaceful country, which places a screen in front of this violence to instead present India as kind of leading this global mission of peace and health and spirituality, right? So yoga is a practice that then becomes politicized through its mention, its use by Modi on an international platform. Now, we might think that Modi and his political party are maybe corrupting something that used to actually be calm, peaceful, and the original idea of yoga maybe was actually all of those things, but maybe he's taken that and he's twisting it for his own purposes, right? But unfortunately, that's not the case either. So the person who's often identified with introducing yoga to the West is Swami Vivekanand, right? He was a Hindu monk and philosopher who became popular in the US after he gave a speech at the 1893 Parliament of World Religions. And through him, both Hinduism and yoga became popular in the West. Now, if we look at that 1893 speech, we can see echoes with the speech of Modi, where he says, "I'm proud to belong to a religion which has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance. We believe not only in universal toleration, but we accept all religions as true." Now, the ironic thing is, the exact events happening in India in 2015 when Modi is giving that speech are also happening back in 1893 when it is Vivekanand giving that speech, right? So there are reports of communal riots in Bombay, communal riots as in divides between different religions within the city, so Hindus, Muslims, Parsis, and it was again connected to cow vigilantism, which, if I can just explain what that term means, you might have heard that the cow is a sacred animal for Hindus, and even today there is a very strong kind of, they would rather kill people than let cows be killed, essentially, right? And that is in the name of peace and non-violence, which clearly doesn't ring true because people are actually dying because of their kind of desire to protect cows because it's a holy animal. So you can see that this exists already in the 19th century, and there's the quote is from the British colonial government back in 1893, which says that the cow protection movement has existed for a while already at this point, right? And it has been growing in the 1890s. So the alienation between Hindus and Muslims in India existed not just for months but for years, when Vivekanand goes to Chicago and says, we're a very welcoming and peaceful religion, right? And then yoga becomes imbued with those same connotations as we know that are still present today, which is this idea of reaching back to something ancient that is peaceful and wonderful. So there is this incredible marketing that has been put into presenting yoga in that way by Vivekanand and all the yoga gurus who have come after him, right? Another important element to talk about in relation to yoga in the 19th century and also the 21st century is that there is a presumption that yoga is specifically a Hindu practice. Now, obviously, it's been divorced from that when it comes into the West. Anyone can practice it. That's kind of the point. But there are multiple kind of histories of yoga in the subcontinent that are not necessarily recognized. So Sufi tradition, which is an Islamic tradition of yoga, exists. There is Tantra traditions, Nath traditions, loads of different traditions of yoga, but these are not necessarily the ones that we identify in the West. And like I said, we can say, right, this is divorced from Hinduism. We don't really bring Hinduism into this, so we don't need to worry about it, but it is not the fact. We do bring Hindu ideals into it. And you can see from that second quote from Puri that she's talking about how chanting Om, for example, that is a Hindu practice. Performing sun salutations, these are all tied to upper caste Hinduism, right? But we have divorced them from that context, and we recognize them as separate practices. They are not. And so the idea of going back to Sanskrit terminology, which that yoga teacher at the beginning was telling us about, is undoubtedly something that will reify upper caste Hinduism, that marginalizes other communities in a country like India, because historically only Brahmins were allowed to read Sanskrit. People would be, there would be violence if anybody else tried to read Sanskrit. So if we go back to using Sanskrit in yoga, performing the kind of the Om that is chanted, again, is something that only Brahmin priests were allowed to do, are still, even today, allowed to do in India. So when we kind of establish India's soft power in the world with yoga as this cultural export, there is a way in which the minorities in India are kind of being marginalized, right? So there is a religious assimilation and kind of a fresh assault on the diversity of religion, cultural practices in India that is happening through International Yoga Day and everything that's associated with it. So it furthers that Hindu nationalist motive of marginalizing them. So one last point that I want to add from Puri's work before moving on is how yoga acts as a link between India's Hindu nationalist cause, which targets Muslims, and the West's Islamophobic war on terror, right? Modi makes a point of presenting yoga as like ancient and spiritual and part of the soul of India because it helps India distance itself from Islam and its neighbors like Pakistan and Afghanistan, who are implicated in this war on terror. So it isn't just in India that yoga is used in this kind of political manner. You could say it's also used in the West because the UN, these are both pages from the UN, can institute a day for yoga, and it can present itself as inclusive of traditions of the East that are peaceful, while there are other Eastern traditions, Muslim traditions, cultures from the Middle East that can be presented as not peaceful, and therefore they are not appreciated in the same way, right? So there's a picking and choosing even in terms of what kind of Orientalist or Eastern traditions we do want to engage with. Now, the final point I want to make in this section, hopefully I'm not taking up too much time, is about the commercialization of yoga, both in India, in India, but both internally as well as in a West-facing sense. And the case study for this is a particular brand of Ayurveda, which is a traditional medical traditional medicine in India. And there's a company called Patanjali, right, which is led by this man, who is India's most popular yoga guru. Okay, so his name is Baba Ramdev. And I have a video here of Ramdev. It is in Hindi, okay, but don't worry. What you will see at the bottom is there is a band on the bottom that reads, well, you'll see it in a minute. It tells you exactly what disease or issue he's trying to cure through yoga, and have a look at whether the postures he's doing seem to you like they're going to be effective in helping with this problem, okay? I hope it's not too loud.
बच्चों की आंखों पर चश्मा, उनको विकल्प के तौर पर जो भी मैं बता रहा था, शीर्षासन या सर्वांगासन, शीर्षासन या सर्वांगासन दोनों में से एक आसन, जो बच्चे शीर्षासन कर पाए उनसे शीर्षासन करवाइए, और जो शीर्षासन नहीं कर पाए उनसे सर्वांगासन तो सभी कर लेते, बहुत ही आंखों से बहुत जरूरी, और यदि कोई दोनों कर ले तो बात अच्छी बात है, शीर्षासन भी हो गया और सर्वांगासन भी, और ये अनुलोम भी।
Okay, you can see that video is ending. I haven't stopped him from any of the poses that he was going to do further to show you how he's going to cure eye problems. So how your glasses are going to disappear if you do those two poses, right? Which, I mean, yeah, it's funny. It's just ridiculous. I got this video from his YouTube, right? And it's recent. It's not like from 10 years ago or anything. It's literally in the last 2 years. So I'm guessing you're seeing the problem here. Like I said, the most popular yoga guru in India, okay? Neither of the poses he showed had anything to do with your eyes. And at the end, he kind of does his breathing techniques. And what he's about to say, I've kind of paused him there, is, if you do this, it's going to make your hair and skin better as well. So your hair care and skin care, everything. Yoga can cure everything, okay? And for us, funny, right? It's ridiculous. But the lies that he tells about yoga and wellness are extremely dangerous. And the reason for that is the stuff behind him. That is his brand. That is Patanjali. And he sells cures for everything. Everything. Diabetes, cancer, liver failure, you name it, he sells it, right? He got in trouble during the pandemic because he was selling a thing called Coronel, which he said is going to cure or prevent COVID-19. Now, this is an article from the BBC from 5 days ago now, because Ramdev is in trouble right now, because he is, the Supreme Court of India has been very tough on him, finally, after years and years, saying, you're lying. None of these cures are actually possible through yoga or through the Ayurvedic products that you're selling. And this is false advertising. And one of the kind of videos on his channel that this article is mentioning, which again is linked, by the way, if you want to read it, he says, why do you take paracetamol? Why are you taking synthetic drugs when you can just use my products instead? So the question is, why is this yoga guru getting away with it, right? How does he blatantly lie about his products? And he sold them to the point of his company being valued in 2023 at $540 million US. Okay, so it's a massive franchise. And that is because of his association with yoga, with spirituality, and with this Orientalist myth of ancient tradition that he claims to be drawing from. Because his practice very much just includes the postural yoga that we have been talking about. We know that this isn't coming necessarily from those ancient sources, but he definitely wouldn't acknowledge that. When he is challenged by the Indian Medical Association or the Supreme Court, his response tends to be, these organizations are brainwashed by the West, they don't know, their authority is kind of undermined in determining the quality and the dangers of the products that he's selling, whereas his own modernity is not questioned. So how did he get famous? This quote tells you that he became famous through televised yoga camps, right? That's his kind of entire process of showcasing these ancient practices comes through consumption on television. His establishment of this capitalist endeavor is hidden behind this facade where he thinks, where he promotes the rediscovery of yoga and other Hindu traditions within the country as part of a revival of ancient Indian civilization. So what we obviously saw is buying these products, the ones that he's selling is fine because they're associated with him, and he's not associated with Western capitalism, but with the age-old science of Ayurveda and yoga that helps Indians connect with their own past and support their country and its traditions, right? So it pretends to come from that ancient Hindu source, but it clearly is not. And it is also supported by the Indian government, which again you can see in that BBC article, who also want to use that same myth of yoga to promote and galvanize Hindus in India to perform patriotism through yoga. So there are strong links between that government as well as Ramdev as well. What this kind of example shows us is how consumerist capitalism, nationalism, Orientalism have all come together to produce this very complex understanding and practice of yoga within India as well. But when this practice is kind of marketed outside of India, that's when it kind of loses its complexity, right? So I'm very quickly going to run through some reviews that I found on Google, well, TripAdvisor actually, for yoga classes in Benares. Benares is the holy city where most people would go to see how ancient India lived or still exists. And one of the things they do there is kind of yoga camps. So even if you just Google yoga in Benares, you can see loads and loads of kind of places that do classes well, it's very much aimed at the Western tourist who comes to Benares, right? So it points to the commercialization of this practice in its apparent place of origin to fulfill these desires of tourists who are coming with the Orientalist idea of doing authentic yoga in India. So the only example I'm going to show you is one of these that I found. And I will say the reviews are lovely. If anybody finds this there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. It's just we're looking for signs of the way that Orientalism and this claim of authenticity is coming through. So this is one of the institutes there. And you can see in their About section, they're talking about it's not just a yoga class, it's a sacred journey into the tradition, history, and experience of yoga. So you go for sunrise boat rides and riverside yoga classes, and you go to ancient temples, and everything's done with the Hindu astrological calendar in mind, offbeat as well, they say. So everything is kind of presented with this idea of authenticity. We're going to do it in the most authentic way because you're in India, and this is where it comes from. And they're also definitely just practicing the postural yoga, right? Couple of reviews that I found. Obviously, I'm not putting their names out here, but they're from very different countries. So you can see here they talk about an ancient and sacred temple they went to do the yoga. So this idea that you're doing it where the yogis would have done it ages ago. Do we have any proof of that? No, but it's just kind of creating the atmosphere, the vibe, right? This one kind of talks about, again, doing it in an old temple and kind of learning all the history. And also I found it interesting that they kind of mix the yoga class with the walking tour. So it becomes, again, that commercialized tourist attraction of doing both these things. Then we've got someone talking about how, anyone interested in starting their yoga journey begin with a real experience in India. Again, real, because it's in India in a temple. This one talks about doing it in a temple again, but while the locals were doing their prayers. So again, kind of drawing authenticity from practicing alongside the people of the country, which must have been really weird for the locals because there are just random people doing yoga in the temple when they go to visit it. So that would have been interesting for them. So again, we can see the same kind of Orientalist, exoticized ideas of India reified here in India for the Western gaze and experience, right? So just to come full circle and finish this section, essentially, we're seeing the politics of yoga in India, everything we just talked about, kind of washed away to appeal, again, to a global audience, considering, again, an ancient tradition. What we've done here through this section is just kind of identified the links between yoga and both the historic and current politics in India, right, which help us realize that decolonization is not this simple thing where you just kind of turn to the origin, move away from the Western practice, but also situating the tradition in its own kind of origins and hierarchies and politics, because that helps us realize that the reputation of yoga and its commercialization is not just a Western thing. It is something that the East has also, the East as in India, has also helped construct. Particularly the dominant kind of power ideologies in India have helped construct these. So yoga is a tool that is being used even today in India to manipulate and navigate national politics, right? So I'll end this section here, and then we'll move on to the next section when Paul will be back.